Good morning. I'm Kristen Balasia, Head of Automotive Advisory at IHS Markit, and welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Michelle Denogean, CMO of Roadster, a leading automotive e-commerce platform provider, and also my colleagues Tom Libby, responsible for industry analysis and loyalty insights, and Ian McIlravey, Associate Director, Dealer Network Planning. Good morning and welcome to you all.
Thanks, Kristen. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to have a good, fun discussion here today. There's a lot of debate about the changing retail model and these discussions and investments that have accelerated by COVID lockdowns and the related changing consumer behaviors. I mean, who amongst us hasn't started making even more purchases online and spending more time researching things that we could or may buy online? But how, when, and why is still something the industry is working hard to figure out. Keeping the customer at the center, trying to drive and maintain loyalty, but balancing that sometimes tricky OEM dealer customer relationship can be a challenge, and really to achieve that win-win-win being the ultimate goal. So Michelle, why don't we start with you? Roadster has just completed an interesting study, actually your third digital retailing study, the Dealer Impact Study 3.0. And throughout it, you show that e-commerce is not a threat or DIY, as you guys put it. Can you share what you mean by that?
Sure. And this, like you said, this is our third wave of studies. We've done all of these studies in concert with NADA, which has been really quite a great partnership through time. And so when we started this, just to give a little background, we did this in the spring of 2020 when, everybody's world shifted under our feet. And at the time, dealerships around the country were really looking at digital retailing as honestly a way to have some kind of business continuity. We had found actually in our first study that a little bit more than a quarter of dealers at that time could only sell online. And so we thought it was a great time for us to start better understanding the impact that this category called digital retailing is really having on the space. There were more dealers than ever jumping in. So we looked at things over the last 12 months, like, profitability, because that's always the biggest question. If I start to, sell cars online or in a digital capacity, will I be able to maintain my profitability? To when I am, without some of my staff due to this pandemic, am I actually able to still sustain some level of sales? Can my people be more effective, more efficient, and more productive than ever before? And actually the answer was yes in that case. And then this wave was really about, okay, we're a year into this thing, a little over a year. What strategies have sustained and what have we learned? And to your point, Kristen, the biggest thing that we learned from this very last wave, and honestly, we've known at Roadster with our 2,000 customers, is that digital retailing is not something that is do it yourself. I think people in our industry have thought for a long time that these commerce platforms they can plug into their website are really just a new channel of sales, and you plug it in and it's going to rain sales, and you don't really have to do anything from a proactive nature. But what we found in the study was that the vast majority of customers that are doing activity online are having some kind of remote interaction with somebody at the dealership before they come in, or if they're buying 100% online, then just throughout their process. And so it's been really interesting to see the growth in activity that's happening online. We still only see about 10% or less of the consumers actually doing the whole purchase online. But what they're doing more and more is much lower activity, like credit apps and trade-ins and that kind of stuff. And all those people that are having those lower funnel purchase activities online are having interactions with the people in the dealership. And so I think what once we thought was something that people just self-service with is really, really about how do I actually proactively guide them. And so it really is about, the people. It is a very human interaction and how they actually engage with customers, just like they are in the showroom, just digitally.
Yeah, those are some great points. And you mentioned, it's something that you plug in and makes it rain. I mean, that's what everyone's looking for, right? Are those sales tools, and understanding that how this can lubricate the process, and where it does play, and how to leverage it is really important. And loyalty is an area obviously we talk about a lot, and is really important as you look at, the market and increasing competitors every day and products every day. And so Tom, that's something you advise on often at every level: manufacturer, brand, dealer, you cover it all. And it was interesting, I don't know if you all saw, but Ford announced through one of their media releases that they would be sharing in a capital markets presentation. So they think it's, significant. That one of their critical areas of focus was on creating value and generating a deep loyalty through an always on customer relationship. So to me, I heard, okay, always on customer relationship. They want a lot of touch points. And this really fed into, I think, this discussion of how does a retail revolution impact Ford, but other OEMs and dealer groups alike, loyalty and opportunities?
Well, Kristen, it's a great question, and I don't think there's any doubt that the entire U.S. culture, to be frank, is moving towards a digital environment, and there's risk and opportunity there. The risk for at the dealer level, also the brand level, the manufacturer level, is that because the entire process is changing, that opens up the possibility for retail customers to, through the process, frankly, defect for a variety of reasons to another dealer, another brand, et cetera. But the opportunity is also there to gain new customers. So it's really not that the dealer landscape is moving 100% to digital, but we all know it's moving at least partially, as Michelle just mentioned, towards digital. And the Ford realizes that its dealers have to be ready for this, and they have to be able to deal with this new process. Even if it's only 20, 30, 40% of their business, that's a lot, and they have to deal with it. If they don't, they're going to lose those customers. So frankly, it's the digital movement towards digital is changing the auto environment at all the different levels, and Ford realizes that, as do other OEMs, that they have to be ready for it, or given how competitive this industry is, that they will just simply lose customers, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle, let me just put it out there. Do customers not want to go into a dealership anymore?
No, they do. Actually, most people do. I think that's the misnomer. We had this event last week called the Modern Retail Road Trip that Roadster hosted, and we had some OEM representation, some public dealer group representation, and it was actually part of the discussion, like, what's the future of digital retailing? And there was a statement that came out of that I think really says it all, that the future is 100% digital. It doesn't mean it's 100% online. And we do mix those things up quite a bit, right? So the fact is, our study shows that the vast majority of people are still coming in. They're coming in to kick the tires. They're coming in for the test drive. They're coming in to ask questions about the vehicle. They're coming in, because they want to talk a little bit about the deal. I mean, there's still that in-person human interaction. But what I think we need to take a look at is how many steps within that process can we do in a digital way to make it more efficient and save everybody time? Because going back to what we were just talking about with loyalty, time is directly tied to satisfaction. I think there's been studies for years, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is, but there's a study that shows that over 70% of the time, customers are really actually quite satisfied with their salespeople. It's time that is the enemy. It's actually not the human interaction. So how do we look at that as a way to breed more loyalty? And in this latest study that we did, we even saw, the people that are spending all that time in the showroom, what their satisfaction scores were through something called Net Promoter Score versus those that were doing things digitally. And it was significantly different. So when you look at that, the Net Promoter Score of somebody that did everything online was 77, which is up there with the likes of Amazon and USAA and Apple. And the people that did it only in the showroom and didn't do any of it ahead of time in a digital format, we're more in the space of 23 or so. And so that's a big difference in whether or not I'm going to recommend this dealership to a friend or family member. And so that's the kind of experience that we really need to look at to drive that loyalty that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. And even during lockdown, people wanted to attempt to go into their dealerships, right?
Yeah. Oh, no. So when the lockdown first happened, I talked to, probably 3 or 4 of our dealer partners every week. And so I was touching base with people to find out what was happening. And I had some of them say, Michelle, our doors are shut, like they're locked. We can't actually let people in. And customers are like knocking on the door to come in the showroom. So even when they couldn't, people really, really wanted to be there. So again, it's not about, whether or not they want to visit the showroom. It's about the flexibility and honoring their time and figuring out how to use some of these new digital capabilities in a seamless way, between what they can do online and even digitally in the showroom once they're there and they've test drove. And, how do we just make it a faster transaction for everybody?
Right. And so, Ian, continuing down this path from really the most important perspective that, we talk about technology, we talk about capability, investment, but it's really the customer, right? Is exactly what you're saying, Michelle. So, Ian, why are we seeing that customers are choosing the purchase path that they are? And what types of things are they considering that dealers and OEMs need to be aware of?
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah. So, I mean, from our research into the vehicle buying journey, and we've looked at that both in the United States and in a number of global markets. It seems to be convenience is still the number one reason, whether they're going into the dealership or shopping online. They're ultimately looking for what is the most convenient way to complete that transaction. And I think that really ties back to Michelle's point about time. It's, how can I get the most out of my time when it comes to purchasing the vehicle and deciding on the configuration and testing it during the test drive and all of this. It all comes back to finding the most convenient option available to them. So, for example, when it comes to consumers who purchase online from start to finish during the pandemic, 64% said that convenience was the number one reason they did so. And the same goes for customers who shopped at the dealership. A big part of it is knowing what to expect when they go to the dealership, that trusted salesperson, or just understanding the process. But again, 61% of those consumers as well say they went to the dealership because it's easy and it's convenient. So it still is the number one driver of why customers choose to shop at a certain dealership over another. It's very important. And then further to that, when we look at, what were they able to complete online versus what are they sort of forced to go and do at the dealership? Identifying where their vehicle, their choice is. So if a dealer has it in stock, is something that most customers would want to be able to do online and know if the inventory is there before taking the time to go and visit that store. Same with arranging a test drive for the vehicle. It ties right back in. And then the third big one is negotiation of price. But I think most brands want to get away from a lot of heavy negotiation, both to save bandwidth for their sales staff and also just have a more consistent purchase experience across their network. But I think that response says more than just says something beyond just negotiation. It's wanting that, human experience, getting in front of a salesperson and making sure that they're getting not necessarily the best deal possible, but making sure that they're getting the most out of that time and the most out of the dealer in terms of a good value for their purchase. So there's a lot to go into when it comes to online buying, But I think a lot of it comes back to just wanting that human experience and exactly what Michelle was saying. It's not just a DIY. It doesn't just plug and play. You have to still put in some time with the customer.
So taking a turn, but this is related, Michelle, I thought it was really interesting when you and I were speaking the other day. You mentioned that along with your CMO responsibilities of marketing, brand strategy, go-to-market efforts, as if that weren't enough, you also have training, education, and analytics under your charge. And I thought that was interesting. Can you talk about why that goes together actually really well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I think in general, when you are out there really talking to your customers, you need to be in touch with what is happening in their world on a daily basis. And so from that perspective, marketing and voice of the customer are very tied together. And so when you have that deep foundational understanding of your customers and you speak to them all the time, then it's natural to become an educator and use all the best practices that you're learning along the way with your, with prospects, with OEMs, with everybody in the industry, because you're just aggregating these rich stories about what people are doing. And I think when it comes to technology in particular in this digital retailing space, it really is only 20% the technology and 80% what people do with it. I think that's true with most technologies, but even more so because, digital retailing really touches every single aspect of the dealership. And so because of that, you have to understand not just, okay, well, this is why you need the technology or here's how to use it, but it's also a very much a process and cultural shift. So the education and training for me is just an extension of everything we're out there talking to the industry about. And then it comes into helping individual rooftops really figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
And then on the analytics side, it's the data, right? I mean, it's data powers the world. And so when you can marry these rich stories that you have of your customers and your partners and what's happening in their business with the data you're seeing from performance of using a platform like Roadsters, then you really have such a rich set of information to help the entire industry really move forward and understand what they need to put in place to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Tom and Ian, same question for both of you, but I know you bring different perspectives. As we move down this digital path, what are the top areas that we as an industry shouldn't lose, focus on or lose touch with to keep customers loyal to a brand or a dealer, really? Maybe Tom, if you want to take that one first.
Sure. Well, I think at the brand level, clearly your product portfolio plays a role, and the wider your product portfolio, the more likely an existing owner can stay with the brand when they return to market. But also other factors. I mean, the relationship between the brand and its captive plays a huge role, because if that relationship is robust and strong and there's a good collaboration between the two, then you get very competitive incentive programs, APR programs, et cetera, et cetera. I would say at the dealer level that certainly the relationship between the dealer and the customer is gigantic, and this goes to both in sales and in service. And how the customer is taken care of during service certainly plays a big role. But I would also say one other thing about dealer loyalty, and that is that the inventory plays a huge role. And does the dealer have the proper inventory, not only of new vehicles, but also of used vehicles, so that if there's a possibility of keeping a customer by putting them into a used and the reverse, certainly that'll help. So I think those are some of the factors that contribute both at the brand level and the dealer level.
Great. Ian, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I'd like to first echo what Tom mentioned there about the importance of service and after sales. When it comes to dealer network planning, it's traditionally been a lot about the new car sales network. But as we're able to sell cars and reach customers digitally and online, I think that it's still going to be important to have a strong new car sales footprint on the ground, but the service footprint is going to become more and more important making sure that, if a customer has a good experience buying the car, that their experience servicing it is even better. And that's really going to drive loyalty over the vehicle lifetime, and then on to the next purchase years down the road. And with our new retail methodology, diversification of formats for dealers is a huge part of that. Understanding, where do we locate a full function dealer versus a service plus used, and also incorporating mobile service and even mobile sales into the network, because we're augmenting the sales process with an increased digital presence, but then you can also take the salesperson directly to the consumer in certain instances to provide them that extra touch, and extra special care where needed. And then beyond that, also incorporating things like retail centrality and understanding where consumers are shopping, where they're commuting, and so forth, in order to plan the network more effectively and really create a better experience for the customer across the vehicle ownership journey, and not just focusing on the new car sale and then moving on, basically.
Yeah, and I know at Roadster, that's something you look at, not just new, but really every aspect. And one thing, maybe Michelle, final question to you. One thing in your study, you actually show that online customers are more likely to add F&I to the deal compared to in-person shoppers, but quite a significant margin. And I think that would surprise a lot of people. And based on, what Tom and Ian have shared, and I'm sure what you've seen, that's good news, because that really supports loyalty as well. But why is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it is something that probably surprises a lot of people, especially because I think if you dial back a few years, that was the biggest fear that everybody had, which is it's going to really hurt my F&I profitability. And what we found is quite the opposite. When people are doing more of the process online, they're actually more likely to add products than when they're in the showroom. And the reason for this, from what we've seen, is it's really more of an educational moment. So if you think about how the process works in a traditional in showroom experience, it's pretty linear. That conversation as it relates to products, whether it's service and protection plans, warranties, what have you, happens at the very end. So I've figured out my deal. I kind of know my payment. I'm settled on the car, and now for the first time, I'm hearing about all of these, products that are available to me. In a digital environment, that education is happening up front, whether they, end up adding them to their order or not. They're able to see them at a moment when they have, their brains aren't focused on finalizing paperwork. They're able to see and think about their driving experience, and what they really need. And I think I shared this story with you, Kristen, when we were talking earlier. My last car buying experience is a great example of this, where, I am, only 5 feet tall, drive a pretty big car. And, I always manage to curb my wheels, always. Like I know this about myself. I've known myself for, decades of driving. And in the moment, after spending all day in the dealership, I said no to tire and wheel protection. Why I did that? I was burnt out. I really wanted to get my car. I wanted to go home. And it was one of the biggest regrets, because sure enough, you should see the wheels on my car. So it really is that final moment of, do you have to sort of think about that at the very end when you're excited about the car, but you just really want to go home? Or can you take a moment? Can you take a breath at the beginning of the process and see all of this? And we know that you are much more likely to buy some of these service and protection plans if you understand what they are and why they would be important to you, than if you don't. Like there are studies, previous studies that Cox Automotive has done that shows that. And so it's not really a surprise that the more educated and the more time and space you have to think about what would be best to protect your vehicle, the more likely you are to add something to your deal. And I think that also bodes. I mean, that's also true with some of our dealerships that use, trade-in tools where the salespeople are actually doing the walk around with the person in an earlier stage of the process, because they can actually see it. Anybody that walked around my car would have known. So I think that's like the whole point is it's really about education, and that's why we're seeing more people do that online than in the showroom.
Well, I think you've just given the dealerships good ideas as to how they should look at people's cars before they sit down and have that conversation, and maybe some product innovation ideas for the OEM and suppliers listening to help you out next time. But certainly exciting times full of change. And as both industry participants and consumers, I think we'll all find it pretty exciting to see how this retail revolution continues. I want to thank you, Michelle Denogean, CMO at Roadster, Tom Libby and Ian McIlravey with IHS Markit for joining this episode of Fuel for Thought. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month. To opt in to our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, visit ihsmarkit.com/auto newsletter.